For over a decade, my hands bore the marks of devotion, calloused palms from changing bed sheets, fingers cracked from constant washing, and a spine that ached from bending over Martha's frail body day after day. My mother-in-law couldn't turn herself in bed, couldn't feed herself, couldn't even call out when she needed cleaning. But I was there, every single day, while Frank, her own son, conveniently found endless excuses. "It's not appropriate for a man to do those things," he'd say, his voice dripping with practiced concern that never translated into action. Each morning began the same massage Martha's legs to prevent blood clots, turn her gently to avoid bed sores, bathe her with care that preserved what little dignity illness had left her. I'd spoon-feed her breakfast, change her soiled sheets, and administer her medications with military precision. The nurses who occasionally visited marveled that Martha never developed a single bed sore, despite being bedridden for years. "You have healing hands, Elaine," they'd say. What they didn't see were the vacations I missed, the career I abandoned, and the dreams I buried beneath mountains of laundry and medical supplies. I never complained. Not when my children Tommy and Sarah went off with Frank to see the Grand Canyon while I stayed behind. Not when they returned from Disney World with sunburned cheeks and stories that didn't include me. "Next time," Frank would promise, his arm loosely draped around my shoulder. "Next time you'll come too." Then he'd hand me some trinket, a keychain, a small figurine, a scarf that probably cost less than their airport coffee, and I'd smile, grateful for the scrap of consideration. When Martha finally passed, I felt a strange mixture of grief and relief wash over me. I had grown to love her despite everything. This woman who had birthed the man who now stood beside her grave, his face arranged in an appropriate mask of sorrow. The tears he shed at the funeral were for the audience, not for her. In the 16 years she'd been bedridden, I could count on one hand the times he'd sat with her for more than 5 minutes. "We need a vacation," Frank declared a month after the funeral. "A family road trip, just what we all need to reconnect." For the first time in years, my heart soared. I threw myself into preparations, researching destinations, packing perfect lunches, even buying new clothes for the occasion. The morning of our departure, I stood by the door, suitcase ready, heart lighter than it had been in years. Frank looked at me strangely. "There's no room in the car," he said, his voice detached, clinical. "You can go next time." Tommy, now 28, chimed in with practiced ease. "Mom, you're not young anymore. It's a long drive, and you'll just complain about your back hurting again." Sarah, 26, didn't even look at me as she brushed past, sliding into the back seat without a word. And then they were gone, just like that, leaving me standing in the doorway of an empty house that suddenly felt as hollow as my chest. The next day, scrolling through my phone more out of habit than interest, I froze. Frank had posted pictures smiling, laughing, arms wrapped around our children, and Nancy, his old college friend Nancy, the woman he'd always described as his kindred spirit. There they were, posed in front of landmarks I'd dreamed of seeing, sharing meals I'd fantasized about tasting, creating memories I'd ached to be part of. I adjusted my reading glasses, studying each photo with the careful attention I'd once given to Martha's medication schedule. 2 years ago, when I'd suggested a family portrait, they'd all groaned, "Too much hassle. Nobody takes those cheesy family photos anymore." Yet here they were, perfectly arranged in one cheesy portrait after another, only I had been erased from the frame. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. The truth hit me with the force of a tidal wave. They hadn't accidentally forgotten to make room for me in the car. They had deliberately made room for someone else. Years of my life spent caring for Frank's mother, raising his children, maintaining his home, all while he built a parallel life with another woman. The trinkets he'd brought back from trips weren't gestures of inclusion. They were offerings of appeasement, small payments for my continued servitude. In that moment, standing in my spotless kitchen that suddenly felt like a prison, I made a decision. The woman who had entered this marriage young, fierce, independent, had been buried under years of sacrifice and neglect, but she wasn't dead. And it was finally time for her to reclaim what was left of her life, whatever the cost. I never thought I'd be left behind like yesterday's newspaper. Not after everything I'd sacrificed. Standing in our driveway that spring morning, I watched Robert load the last suitcase into our family SUV. My own small travel bag sat by my feet, packed with such care the night before my comfortable walking shoes, my favorite cardigan for cool evenings, even a new paperback I'd been saving for this moment. After 10 years of caring for his mother, Eleanor, who had been bedridden with multiple sclerosis, I was finally going to see the mountains Robert had described so vividly during our courtship. "All set," Robert called out, slamming the trunk shut with a satisfied smile. Our children, Michael, 30, and Jennifer, 28, emerged from the house, laughing about something on Michael's phone. I reached down to grab my bag, anticipation making my heart flutter like it hadn't in years. "Mom," Michael said, his voice suddenly serious as he noticed my movement. "There's actually no room in the car for you." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me." Robert walked over, not quite meeting my eyes. "The car's packed pretty tight. Susan? And honestly, it's a long drive through winding roads. You get carsick easily. Remember last Christmas when we drove to your sister's? Your back was bothering you the whole time." "You can come next time," Jennifer added, already sliding into the back seat, her attention back on her phone. Her tone made it clear there wasn't room for discussion. I stood there, frozen, watching as Robert kissed my cheek, a perfunctory peck that felt like a door closing. "We'll bring you something nice," he promised. The words so routine, I wondered how many times he'd said them before. Then they were gone, leaving nothing but a cloud of exhaust and the echo of doors slamming. I walked back into our empty house, feeling oddly weightless, as if I might float away. For a decade, my days had been structured around Eleanor's needs, medication schedules, physical therapy exercises, bathing, feeding, changing. The constant cycle of laundry had become so familiar that even now, weeks after her passing, I still woke at 2 a.m. to check if her sheets needed changing. Now, standing in our living room, the silence was deafening. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture as if to confirm my own existence. In the kitchen, I mechanically made a cup of tea, remembering how Eleanor had liked hers weak, with just a touch of honey. She'd been difficult, sometimes cruel in her pain, but I'd cared for her with a dedication that Robert had never shown his own mother. "It's not appropriate for me to help with those things," he'd say, whenever I asked him to assist with his mother's more intimate care needs. "Besides, you're so much better at it than I am." The compliment had soothed me then. Now it felt like salt in an open wound. The next morning, I opened my laptop to check the weather, a habit from planning Eleanor's sun sessions by the window. Instead, I found myself scrolling through Facebook. That's when I saw it. Robert had posted photos from their first day of vacation. There, smiling between my children, was Patricia, Robert's old friend from college, who supposedly just happened to be in the area and joined them for dinner. Only, the photos told a different story. There were dozens of them, Patricia, with her arm around Robert at a scenic overlook. Patricia toasting with my children at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try. Patricia in the front seat of our car. My hands trembled as I clicked through the album. 2 years ago, when I'd suggested taking a family photo for our Christmas card, Robert had scoffed. "Nobody does those cheesy portraits anymore," he'd said. "We can do it next year." Yet here they were, posed like a perfect family in front of a stunning mountain vista, the very view I dreamed of seeing. I adjusted my reading glasses, looking closer at Patricia's neck. The scarf she wore, navy blue with the subtle designer logo, was identical to one Jennifer had raved about last month. "It costs more than my first car payment," she'd said when I admired it. Yet there it was, wrapped around Patricia's neck while I sat at home with my collection of cheap trinkets from Robert's previous business trips. A memory surfaced Robert, giving me a bouquet of dried flowers for our anniversary. "Fresh flowers wither and die," he'd said, "but these will last forever, just like our love." Meanwhile, in these photos, Patricia held a lush bouquet of fresh roses. I closed the laptop, my chest tight with a feeling I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't just anger or hurt, it was awakening. For years, I'd believed I was making noble sacrifices for our family's well-being. I'd given up my career as a dental hygienist to care for Eleanor, surrendered vacations to maintain her care schedule, foregone personal pleasures to stretch Robert's income further, all while he traveled, lived, and apparently loved with someone else. I walked to our bedroom and caught my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair I hadn't had time to color, lines around my eyes from years of interrupted sleep, hands roughened by constant washing and work. When had I become this woman? When had I agreed to be erased? The phone rang, startling me. It was Robert. "Just checking in," he said, his voice casual, as if he were calling from a routine business trip. "Everything okay at home?" I took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I saw everything with perfect clarity. "No, Robert," I said quietly. "Everything is not okay at all." And for once, I wasn't going to pretend it was. I never imagined I'd discover my husband's affair through a Facebook photo. Not after 30 years of marriage. Not after a decade of bathing, feeding, and caring for his mother. The image burned into my eyes like acid. Jack, our children Emily and Peter, and Margaret, his college friend, all smiling from the balcony of a beachfront resort in Florida. The same resort Jack had once promised to take me to someday when things settled down. I adjusted my reading glasses, hoping I was mistaken. But there was no mistake. Margaret's arm was casually draped across my husband's shoulders, her face tilted toward him with the easy intimacy of long-established affection. It had been 2 weeks since Helen's funeral. Jack's mother had finally found peace after years of suffering, and for the first time in over a decade, I felt I could breathe again. When Jack suggested a family vacation, I'd thrown myself into preparations with a joy I hadn't felt in years. I packed snacks for the road, researched attractions, even bought a new sundress, my first frivolous purchase in ages. Then came the moment when Jack stood at our front door, car keys dangling from his fingers, and told me there wasn't enough room in the car. "You can come next time," he said, as if offering a consolation prize to a disappointed child. Emily, our 32-year-old daughter, had chimed in, "Mom, you're not exactly young anymore. It's a long drive, and your back will just act up again." Peter, 29, hadn't even looked up from his phone as he brushed past me to the car. I'd stood in the driveway, watching them pull away, feeling hollow, yet somehow still making excuses for them in my mind. They needed time together, Jack had been stressed at work. The kids were busy with their own lives, but now, staring at these photos, a different story emerged. I scrolled through Jack's timeline, something I rarely had time to do when caring for Helen. There they were, Jack and Margaret at a concert 6 months ago. Jack, the kids, and Margaret at a Christmas market last year. The three of them hiking in the mountains 2 summers ago. Each photo was a knife, revealing years of deception happening right under my nose. A memory surfaced. 2 Thanksgivings ago, I'd asked everyone to pose for a family portrait. Mom, nobody does those cheesy family photos anymore. Emily had groaned. We can do it next time, Jack had said, patting my shoulder. It just looks so forced and fake, Peter had added, already walking away. Yet here they were, in photo after photo, smiling together the perfect family portrait, just without me. I knew Margaret. We'd all been friends in college. Jack's kindred spirit. People used to call her. I never worried because Jack had chosen me. Proposed to me on a snowy December evening with stars in his eyes and promises on his lips. My hands trembled as I gripped my phone. The house around me, the house I'd maintained spotlessly while raising our children and nursing his mother, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. I wandered from room to room, seeing ghosts of my sacrificed years in every corner. I remembered the endless nights caring for Helen, changing soiled sheets, administering medications, massaging her limbs to prevent bed sores. Jack had always had an excuse. It's not appropriate for me to do those things, he'd say, though somehow it had been perfectly appropriate for me. Every holiday, every vacation, every moment when they went off to enjoy themselves, I stayed behind. I would daydream while scrubbing Helen's clothes, imagining the places they described when they returned. Emily and Peter would be too busy to share details, but Jack would bring me some trinket, a scarf, a seashell, a ceramic figurine, and wrap his arm around me, saying, "You've worked so hard. Annie, this family couldn't function without you. Marrying you was the best decision of my life." Those sweet words had always been enough to soothe me. I'd grown up with a father who never spoke gently, surrounded by men who saw tenderness as weakness. Jack's occasional softness felt like treasure. I dumped the contents of my memory box onto the bed, all those treasures he'd brought me over the years. A faded scarf that had probably cost less than their airport coffee. A chipped seashell anyone could have picked up from the shore. A pair of ceramic figurines that looked childish and cheap in the harsh afternoon light. Then I remembered the designer scarf I'd noticed around Margaret's neck in the photo. Emily had one just like it, a Christmas gift that had cost more than our monthly utilities. Next to it, the expensive watch gleaming on Jack's wrist, a business expense he couldn't possibly justify to me. And the roses. In one photo, Margaret held a bouquet of fresh roses, while in my memory box sat dried flowers Jack had given me years ago. Fresh flowers don't last, he'd said. They wither in days. But these dried ones will last forever, just like our love. Looking back now, I could see the cruel irony in his words. Our marriage had indeed been like those dried flowers, brittle, colorless, preserved in a state that resembled life, but held none of its vitality. With shaking fingers, I dialed Jack's number. He answered on the 5th ring, his voice low and impatient. "Make it quick. I'm busy." "How so?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The car didn't have room for me, but it had room for Margaret. There was a pause just long enough to confirm everything before he fumbled for an excuse. "Margaret just happened to be coming along. She's a friend. That's all. Besides, she helped book the hotel for me and the kids." Out of all the hotels in the world, Only she could book one. I laughed bitterly. I could have booked a hotel too. I took a deep breath before delivering what I knew would hit him where it hurt. Or was it special? Did the hotel she booked come with someone to undress you, softer sheets? Maybe. From the other end, I heard a faint voice calling Jack's name. Her voice. He didn't argue, didn't try to explain, just brushed me off. Stop talking nonsense. Don't go around spreading rumors. Margaret is a dear friend, nothing more. And then Kate, the final insult. So what if I didn't bring you this time? You can come next time. All right. He hung up, leaving me with those familiar, hollow words echoing in my ears. Next time. There had been so many next times over our 30 years together, and somehow my time had never come. But as I stood in our empty house, something shifted inside me. This would be the last next time Jack ever offered me, because for the first time in decades, I was finally putting myself first. I wasn't always the faded woman who shuffled around in house slippers and fretted over laundry stains. There was a time when I stood tall, when my voice carried across rooms and my dreams stretched beyond the boundaries of a small-town life. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between caring for William's mother and preparing dinner, I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection and wonder, what happened to that girl with fire in her eyes before I became Mrs. Catherine Reynolds? I was just Kathy Martin, the sharp-tongued daughter of a waitress who worked double shifts at the Bluebird Diner to put me through school. Mom would come home with swollen feet and the smell of coffee grounds in her hair, but she never complained. Education is your ticket out, she'd say, massaging her calves with mint lotion. Don't let anyone tell you different. I took her words to heart. While other girls in Riverdale focused on finding husbands, I buried myself in textbooks. My grades were exceptional, top of my class in every subject. Teachers spoke of scholarships, of universities in distant cities where I could become anything: a doctor, a lawyer, maybe even a professor. The future stretched before me like an open highway, and I was ready to press the gas pedal all the way down. Then came that spring night when everything changed. I was walking home from the library, arms loaded with books for my final exams. The street lights cast long shadows as I took my usual shortcut through Thompson Park. I never worried about danger. Riverdale was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbor's business better than their own. But that night, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, determined footsteps that quickened when I quickened my pace. Before I could reach the park exit, 3 men from the lumber mill boys I'd gone to school with, who'd always resented my academic success, blocked my path. "Look who's out past her bedtime," one of them slurred, the stench of whiskey hanging in the air between us. "Little Miss Smarty Pants thinks she's better than everyone else." What followed was a blur of motion and instinct. When the first one grabbed my arm, something primitive awoke inside me. I dropped my books, reached into my bag, and pulled out the baseball bat I kept there, a gift from my father before he left us. Mom had insisted I carry it, just in case. "The world isn't always kind to smart girls," she'd warned. I swung with every ounce of strength I possessed. The crack of wood against bone echoed through the empty park. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from someone they dismissed as just a girl. Sighing within minutes, they were scrambling away, one clutching his bleeding nose, another limping badly, and I stood there, trembling but unbroken, surrounded by my scattered books. When I reported the incident to Sheriff Davis the next morning, the men were arrested. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But in Riverdale, stories traveled faster than truth. By lunchtime, whispers followed me through the school hallways. "Did you hear about Kathy Martin? She attacked those poor guys for no reason. So my cousin said she was asking for it, walking alone that late. She's too aggressive, no man would ever want her. Even after the men confessed, the damage was done. People looked at me differently. When I walked into a room, conversations hushed. Mothers pulled their sons away as if I carried something contagious. Had I done something wrong? Was I supposed to have just stood there and let them hurt me to prove I was ladylike enough? Mom noticed the change. I'd catch her staring at me across the dinner table, worry etching lines around her eyes. One night, I found her sitting on the edge of my bed, clutching my college acceptance letter. "If this keeps up," she whispered, "will anyone ever want to marry you?" Her question stung worse than the rumors. Even my mother, who had raised me to be independent, feared I'd become unmarriageable, as if that were the ultimate measure of a woman's worth. That's when William Reynolds changed everything. He'd gone away to college 2 years earlier, one of the few from our town who had made something of himself, home for spring break during his final semester. He walked into the crowded Main Street cafe where I worked weekends. Without hesitation, he approached my counter, ignoring the whispers that followed him. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "Those guys were always trouble. You did what you had to do." Before leaving, he slipped a folded note into my hand. A love letter, honest and sweet, and utterly unexpected. The next day, he did something even more remarkable. In that same cafe, filled with the very people who had shunned me, William took my hand in his and kissed it. The message was clear. This girl is worthy of love, just like that. The town's attitude shifted. The whispers stopped. The stares softened into curious glances. I was no longer the dangerous girl with the baseball bat. I was the lucky girl chosen by William Reynolds. And I had been grateful. So grateful that when William went back to finish his degree, I mailed him care packages containing shirts I'd saved for months to buy. When he landed his first job, I postponed my own college plans to support him, telling myself it was temporary. When we married, I threw myself into creating the perfect home, becoming the perfect wife, and eventually the perfect mother to our children, Thomas and Rebecca. When his parents aged and his father died, it seemed natural that his mother would come live with us, and when she became bedridden, there was never any question about who would care for her. William had saved me from becoming the town pariah. Surely I owed him this devotion and more. But now, staring at the photos of William with his old friend Victoria, I was forced to confront a painful truth. I hadn't just put my dreams on hold. I'd abandoned them entirely. The scholarship to State University, my plans to study literature, my secret dream of becoming a writer, all sacrificed at the altar of gratitude to a man who'd vowed to love me, but had instead used my thankfulness as a chain to bind me to a life of servitude. What would Mom say if she could see me now, the daughter she'd raised to fly, now clipped of her wings and confined to a cage of her own making? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the feeling of that baseball bat in my hands, the surge of power, the absolute certainty that I had the right to defend myself, to claim my space in the world. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath years of compromise and sacrifice, that fierce girl still existed, and it was time to let her out again. I never intended to become vindictive. Spite was never in my nature. But after discovering that Howard had been traveling with Valerie, while I'd spent years changing his mother's bedpans, something dark and unfamiliar ignited inside me. The smoldering ember of resentment I'd carried for years suddenly blazed into fury. Standing on our bedroom balcony, I kept scrolling through the photos on Howard's social media page. There they were, my husband, Our children, Samantha and Nathan, and Valerie, all smiling from the balcony of a mountain lodge in Colorado. They looked so happy, so carefree, while I had spent the past decade trapped in a house that smelled perpetually of disinfectant and adult diapers. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped my phone. I remembered how Howard used to call Valerie his kindred spirit back in college. They shared a love of literature, jazz, and art films, interests he'd always dismissed when I expressed them. "That's just not your world, Ruth," he'd say with that condescending smile. Now I understood why he'd already chosen someone else to share that world with. I wandered through our empty house, every room suddenly feeling foreign. For 10 years, I had scrubbed these floors, dusted these shelves, and washed these windows while caring for Edith, Howard's mother. He had always found excuses not to help. "I'm a man. Ruth, it's not appropriate for me to do those things." Okay, so the responsibility fell on me every holiday, every vacation, every moment when they went off to enjoy themselves while I stayed behind. Rage burned in my chest as I dialed Howard's number. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice immediately impatient. "Make it quick. I'm busy." "So the car didn't have room for me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. But it had room for Valerie. A pause, just a beat too long. Valerie just happened to be coming along. She's a friend, that's all. He cleared his throat. Besides, she was the one who helped book the cabins for me and the kids. "I could have booked a cabin too," I replied, surprised by the ice in my voice. "Or was it special? Did the cabin she booked come with someone to warm your bed?" From the other end, I heard a woman's voice calling Howard's name. He didn't even bother to deny it, just brushed me off. "Stop talking nonsense. Don't spread rumors. Valerie is a dear friend, nothing more." After he hung up, I received a text from Nathan. "Mom, Val got us a huge discount on the cabins through her cousin. Sam and I are keeping an eye on Dad for you. They're totally above board, so what's there to worry about? Oh, by the way, I ordered a new laptop. It should be delivered tomorrow. Can you move it into my room? Be careful with it. It's expensive." I laughed bitterly at the irony. I was too frail to sit in a car for a long trip, but not too frail to lift a heavy computer for him. The callousness of it all struck me like a physical blow. For years, Howard had talked about how much he loved his mother, how much he cared for her. He would sigh dramatically, telling people how hard it was, how much he wished he could do more for her. Yet in reality, he had barely fed her. I stormed through the house, looking for something, anything that would make me feel less powerless. I found myself in Howard's study, a room he treated as sacred ground. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with expensive first editions, leather-bound classics, and signed novels he bragged about at dinner parties. His handwritten notebooks, what he called his life's work, sat in neat stacks on his antique desk. These books were Howard's most prized possessions. While I wore secondhand clothes and clipped coupons to save money, he spent thousands on rare editions. "It's different," he'd say when I questioned the expense. "These are investments. They'll be worth even more someday." I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the soft leather, the embossed titles. Howard had never let me touch these books without permission. They were too valuable, too important, just like Valerie was too important to be left behind on a family vacation. While I was not, a cold smile spread across my lips. If he loved his precious books so much, I'd make sure they ended up somewhere they'd be appreciated. I marched into our bedroom, pulled out a large suitcase, and returned to the study. One by one, I packed his first editions, his handwritten journals, and every signed novel. I worked methodically, without hesitation, filling the suitcase until it bulged at the seams. Then I zipped it up, grabbed the handle, and walked out the door with my head held high. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the city library, facing Tom Bradley, the head librarian. We'd gone to high school together, though we hadn't spoken much in recent years, except for a brief conversation at the hospital when Edith had pneumonia last winter. His eyes widened in shock when I opened the suitcase. "Ruth, these books are incredible, he gasped, lifting a leather-bound first edition of The Great Gatsby with reverent hands. "Are you sure you want to donate them all?" "Yes," I said coolly. "Howard has moved on to finer things. These are nothing more than discarded relics to him. Keeping them at home is a waste. Better to donate them so real book lovers can appreciate them." Tom's fingers traced over the spines of the signed editions, his expression one of sheer reverence. He practically cradled a limited edition anthology in his hands. "Ruth, these books are impossible to find on the market now. Keeping them in the family would be a legacy. Are you sure you don't want to save them for your kids?" Legacy. A bitter smile curled on my lips. What family do I have? My children don't even care about me. Why would they treasure these books? I straightened my shoulders. Enough talking. Do you want them or not? If not, I'll take them somewhere else. His head bobbed quickly. Of course I want them. These are priceless. I watched as he clutched those books like buried treasure, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. For the first time in years, I had made a decision entirely for myself. "Great," I said. "They're yours to handle now." As I walked out of the library, something shifted inside me. The weight I'd been carrying, years of resentment, sacrifice, and silent suffering seemed slightly lighter. I hadn't just given away Howard's books. I'd taken my first step toward reclaiming my power. Back at home, I booked a train ticket to Chicago. It would be my first real trip in over a decade. I wasn't asking for permission, and I wasn't waiting for an invitation. For once in my life, I was going to see the world on my own terms. Howard's credit card would do nicely for the expenses. After all, half of that money was rightfully mine, even if he'd never treated it that way. I packed a small bag with just the essentials, no need to bring much. Freedom, as it turned out, traveled light. I never thought my own flesh and blood would turn against me. After all I had sacrificed, after all the nights I spent rocking them through fevers and nightmares, after all the school lunches packed and tears wiped away, I thought I had earned their loyalty, or at the very least, their understanding. I was wrong. When I confronted Charles about his family vacations with Barbara, I expected shock, perhaps denial. What I didn't expect was the wall of defense my children would build around him. That evening, after discovering the photos, I sat at our kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, gone cold. The house was quiet, too quiet without Evelyn's medical equipment humming in the background. Charles's mother had passed just weeks ago, and her absence left a strange emptiness, a void that highlighted how much of my life had been consumed by her care. The front door opened, and I heard my son Andrew's voice before I saw him. "Mom, you here?" He strode into the kitchen, looking like his father in his pressed button-down and khakis. At 32, he had Charles's confidence, but none of his charm. "There you are," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. "Dad called. He's pretty upset." I set my mug down carefully. "Is he now?" Andrew pulled out a chair and sat across from me, his expression a mixture of concern and condescension, the same look he gave his 4-year-old when she was being difficult. "Mom, what's going on with you? Why are you making these ridiculous accusations about Dad and Aunt Barbara? Aunt Barbara, I repeated, the term bitter on my tongue. In all the years I'd known Barbara, she had never been Aunt anything. She was Charles's college classmate, occasionally mentioned, rarely seen. Now suddenly she was family. Yes, Aunt Barbara, Andrew insisted. She's been Dad's friend forever. You know that. And I pushed my phone across the table, open to the photos I'd found. Friends don't go on family vacations together for years without telling the actual family. Andrew barely glanced at the screen. Mom, you're being ridiculous. How can you talk about Barbara like that? She came here out of kindness to clear up this misunderstanding between you and Dad. Misunderstanding. The word hung in the air between us. Is that what we're calling it now? Before Andrew could respond, my daughter Melissa walked in. At 29, she was the spitting image of me at her age, or rather, what I might have looked like if I'd had access to expensive hair products and regular manicures. Her face was drawn into lines of disapproval before she even saw me. Mom, she said, her voice sharp with accusation. What did you say to Aunt Barbara? She left here in tears. So Barbara had already been here, in my home. The thought of her sitting on my couch, touching things I had cleaned and cared for, made my skin crawl. I haven't said a word to Barbara, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I haven't even seen her. Melissa rolled her eyes dramatically. Well, she knows exactly what you think of her. Dad told us everything how you accused them of having an affair just because they happened to be on the same vacation. Happened to be. I let out a laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. They've been traveling together for years. Look. I gestured to my phone again. But neither of my children seemed interested in evidence. Even if they have been traveling together, Melissa continued, that doesn't mean anything inappropriate was happening. Dad would never do that. Your father is human, Melissa. Humans lie. Mom. Andrew's voice rose sharply. That's enough. How can you talk about Dad like that after everything he's done for this family? I stared at my son, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. And what exactly has he done? Andrew, please, enlighten me. Andrew's face flushed. He supported us. He gave us everything. He gave you everything, I corrected. I was the one who stayed up all night helping with your science projects. I was the one who drove you to baseball practice at 5 a.m. I was the one who worked part-time while raising you both and caring for your grandmother. That's different, Andrew said dismissively. Dad was the breadwinner. Those words, so casually cruel, struck me like a physical blow. In their eyes, I had contributed nothing of value because my labor had been unpaid. Who do you think stretched your father's paycheck to cover all our expenses? I asked quietly. Who do you think managed this household so he could focus on his career? Melissa sighed dramatically. Mom, we're not saying you didn't do anything. We're just saying you're overreacting about Barbara. They're just friends. Friends, I repeated. Tell me, Melissa, do you take tropical vacations with your male friends while hiding it from your husband? Her cheeks colored slightly. That's totally different. Is it, or are there different rules for your father than for the rest of us? Andrew cut in, his patience clearly wearing thin. Look, Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but you need to stop. Dad never abandoned you despite everything. Despite what? Exactly, I challenged, my voice deadly quiet. He faltered, suddenly finding the tabletop fascinating. Nothing. I just meant, you know. No, I don't know. Please finish your thought. Melissa jumped in, ever the peacemaker when it suited her. Andrew doesn't mean anything by it. Mom, it's just, well, Dad's always been so patient, and you haven't exactly been easy to live with, especially these past few years. I felt something snap inside me. Easy to live with. I spent the last decade of my life changing your grandmother's diapers, bathing her, feeding her, turning her every 2 hours so she wouldn't develop bed sores. I gave up my career, my friends, any semblance of a personal life, and you have the audacity to sit there and tell me I wasn't easy to live with. See, Andrew said to Melissa, as if I'd just proven his point. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's always so defensive. I stood up slowly, my hands braced against the table. Get out of my house. Andrew blinked. What? You heard me? Both of you. Get out. Now. Melissa looked at me with wide eyes. Mom, you're being dramatic. We just came to help. Help who? Your father? The man who's been lying to all of us for years. Or Barbara, the woman who's been playing house with your father while I was trapped here. Neither of them needs your help. I'm the one who deserved your loyalty. Andrew stood up, his face rigid with anger. Fine. Call us when you're ready to apologize. Apologize. I almost laughed. For what? For finally seeing the truth. They left without another word, slamming the door behind them. The sound echoed through the empty house, a hollow punctuation to the end of my illusions about family loyalty. I sank back into my chair, unexpected calm washing over me. In less than a day, my entire world had shifted on its axis. My husband was a liar. My children were strangers. The life I had sacrificed everything for was a carefully constructed facade, yet somehow, in this moment of complete isolation, I felt more clarity than I had in years. Without the weight of their expectations and judgments, I could finally see the path forward. It wouldn't include them. Half of my assets keep dreaming, Day. George sneered, tearing the divorce papers into pieces that fluttered to our kitchen floor. At most, I'll give you $15,000 as a settlement. Take it or leave with nothing. The sheer audacity stole my breath. After 32 years of marriage, my contribution to our life together amounted to less than the price of his fishing boat. I watched him standing there in our kitchen, in the home I had maintained spotless for decades, wearing the shirt I had ironed just yesterday, and something hardened inside me. Are you sure you want to do this? George, I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm giving you an easy way out, a clean break. He scoffed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. There's no reasoning with you, Evelyn. All right, I nodded. Just remember, you chose this. I grabbed my purse and turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice rang out. Where do you think you're going? The house isn't even clean yet. I didn't turn around. For the first time in our marriage, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The following morning, I stationed myself outside George's office building with a large poster board covered with pictures documenting his years of vacations with Karen. It didn't take long for a crowd to gather. His colleagues slowed their morning rush. Coffee cups paused midway to lips as they recognized their respected coworker in compromising photos. Whenever someone asked, I told our story without embarrassment, how he had built his career on the foundation of my sacrifice, how he had spent decades telling me we couldn't afford vacations while secretly taking luxury trips with Karen, how he now wanted to discard me with nothing after I'd spent 16 years caring for his bedridden mother. Mrs. Wilson, one of George's coworkers, approached cautiously. What's the point of this look? Maybe George was wrong, but you don't actually have proof that anything inappropriate happened. Why don't we just get him to apologize? You've been together for so many years. Why go through all this trouble?" I smiled coldly. "This blessing you speak of a life of doing laundry and scrubbing floors while someone else vacations on tropical islands. Would you like it for yourself?" His mouth snapped shut. Before he could respond, his phone rang. When he hung up, his face had drained of color. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, suddenly formal. "You need to stop this. George is in the hospital." I gave him a disinterested blink. "And that concerns me how, minutes later, my son Patrick called, his voice frantic. 'Mom, where are Dad's books? His notebooks, his signed first editions. Where are they? And why do you care?' I asked calmly. 'That's his whole life. Mom.' This morning he went to his study, saw the books were gone, and collapsed on the spot. I had to take him to the hospital. I almost laughed. Even now, Patrick thought I was just throwing a tantrum, hiding George's precious books to get attention. 'Did your father not tell you I'm divorcing him?' Patrick scoffed. 'Divorce? After all these years? Come on, Mom. Let's not be dramatic. Just tell me where you hid the books.' I savored the moment. 'You're right, Patrick. I didn't throw them away.' I paused. 'I donated them to the city library.' 'What, Mom? You're joking, right? You can't just do that. How could you?' I hung up and blocked his number. When my daughter Lisa called later, her voice was eerily calm. 'Mom, Dad had a stroke. Do you want to come see him?' 'I won't be coming.' I replied simply. 'I've already contacted my lawyer about the divorce.' There was a long pause. 'I see. Well, I should get back to Dad.' And no questions about why I wanted a divorce after 32 years. No concern for how I was feeling. Just a quick pivot back to George, as always. The divorce battle dragged on for an entire year. George used every connection to stall the process, convinced he could wear me down. What he failed to understand was that I had nothing left to lose. When you've already sacrificed your youth, your career, and your children's respect, what remains is a fearlessness that terrifies those who've never faced true loss. I fought with a tenacity that surprised even my lawyer. I documented every penny I had saved over the years that went into our joint accounts. I calculated the market value of the care I had provided to George's mother, care that would have cost him thousands each month in a nursing facility. I gathered evidence of all the trips George had taken with Karen using our joint funds. When the court ruling finally came down, George was forced to split our assets evenly. His torn-up agreement had only cost him more in legal fees and damaged his reputation when details of our case became public. His health never fully recovered from the stroke. Karen took care of him briefly, but eventually she left, unable to stand living with a man who had lost his status. The same children who once relied on George for support now found themselves too busy with their own lives to care for him properly. In the final irony, he was sent to a nursing home, the very fate he had insisted I spare his mother from by becoming her unpaid nurse for 16 years. I never went to see him. That chapter of my life was closed. At 63, I had finally learned the most important lesson. My value was never determined by what others thought of me, but by what I knew of myself. Early the next morning, I positioned myself right outside Benjamin's office building. The large poster board I'd created leaned against my leg, filled with photos and detailed timelines of Benjamin and Carolyn's grand love story, and I'd spent hours compiling evidence from social media pictures of them at resorts, restaurants, and landmarks across the country, spanning years. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a strange, unfamiliar sense of liberation. At 62, I was finally doing something completely for myself, regardless of the consequences. "What is she doing?" I heard someone whisper as the morning crowd of well-dressed professionals began to notice me. A few slowed their hurried pace. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips as they recognized Benjamin, their respected colleague, in photos that contradicted everything he claimed to stand for. "Isn't that Ben Taylor's wife?" Another voice murmured. "Ex-wife. Actually," I corrected loudly, straightening my shoulders. "Or at least, I will be, once he stops trying to cheat me out of what I'm owed after 35 years of marriage." A small crowd gathered, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable curiosity to outright embarrassment on Benjamin's behalf. I didn't care. For decades, I had been invisible, the dutiful wife who stayed home while Benjamin built his career, the silent caretaker who spent 10 years bathing his mother, changing her sheets, and managing her medications. Now finally, I would be seen. Finally, Each time someone asked what was happening, I told our story without hesitation, how Benjamin had built his career on the foundation of my sacrifice, how he had spent years telling me we couldn't afford vacations while secretly taking luxury trips with Carolyn, how he now wanted to discard me with nothing after I'd devoted a decade to caring for his bedridden mother. Mrs. Taylor, one of Benjamin's younger colleagues, approached cautiously. "What's the point of all this? Look, maybe Ben was wrong, but you don't actually have proof that anything inappropriate happened between him and Carolyn. Do you? Why don't we just get him to apologize? You've been together for so many years, you should be enjoying your retirement by now. Why go through all this trouble? It's so messy." I fixed him with a steady gaze. "Enjoying my retirement," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "A retirement spent doing what? Exactly more laundry, more cooking, more scrubbing floors while someone else enjoys tropical islands." I folded my arms across my chest. "This picture of marital bliss you're painting, would you want it for yourself?" His mouth snapped shut before he could attempt another excuse. His phone rang. He answered, his expression growing increasingly uncomfortable as he listened. When he hung up, his face had drained of color. "Mrs. Taylor, Ben," he said, suddenly formal. "You need to stop this. Ben's been taken to the hospital." I gave him a calm look. "And that concerns me how." Minutes later, my own phone buzzed with my son Mark's ringtone. I answered, bracing myself. "Mom." His voice was frantic, almost desperate. "What did you do with Dad's books, his first editions, his signed collections? They're all gone." I raised an eyebrow. "And why do you care?" "That's his whole life. Mom, he went to his study this morning, saw everything was gone, and collapsed. They think he had a stroke. I had to rush him to the emergency room." I almost laughed at the irony. Even now, Mark thought I was just throwing a childish tantrum, hiding Benjamin's precious books to get his attention. "Did your father not tell you?" I asked calmly. "I'm divorcing him," Mark scoffed. "Divorce after all these years? Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic. Just tell me where you hid the books, and I'll come get them." I savored the moment before delivering the blow. "You're right, Mark. I didn't throw them away." I paused. "I donated them to the public library." There was a stunned silence. "What, Mom? You're joking." "Right. This isn't funny. You can't just... How could you be so..." I hung up before he could finish. Then I blocked his number. When my daughter Lisa called later, Her voice wasn't panicked like Mark's. Instead, it was eerily calm, almost clinical. "Mom, Dad had a stroke. Do you want to come see him? I know you probably don't, but I figured I should at least ask." There was something hollow in her tone, as if she wasn't expecting anything from me. For a brief moment, I felt the old instinct to comfort her, to be the mother who fixed everything. But I held back. She was 33 now, not the little girl who used to run to me with skinned knees and broken toys. "I won't be coming," I replied simply. "This situation would only make the divorce messier." "Divorce?" Lisa sounded mildly surprised. "So you're really going through with it?" "Yes, I am. I've already spoken with my lawyer." There was a long pause. "I see. Well, I should get back to Dad." And that was it. No questions about why I wanted a divorce after 35 years. No concern for how I was feeling. Just a quick pivot back to Benjamin, as always. I had been invisible in my own life for so long that even my children saw right through me. But that was about to change. The woman who had entered this marriage young, ambitious, with dreams of her own, had been buried under years of sacrifice and neglect. But she wasn't gone. And now she was fighting her way back to the surface. Benjamin's precious books, the ones he'd spent thousands on while I clipped coupons and bought secondhand clothes, were now in the hands of people who would truly appreciate them. And I was finally free to write my own story, without his footnotes cluttering every page. As I walked away from his office building that morning, head held high despite the whispers and stares, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the weight of my own power. It wasn't tied to Benjamin or his approval or his well-being. It was mine alone, solid and unwavering, like the ground beneath my feet. After a year of legal battles that drained both my patience and Henry's resources, the judge finally issued his ruling. I sat in the courtroom, back straight, eyes forward, as the words I had fought so hard to hear were finally spoken. The court finds that the marital assets shall be divided equally between the parties. Equal division. After 37 years of marriage, 16 of which I had spent as his mother's caretaker, I was finally recognized as an equal partner. Not the $15,000 as settlement that Henry had so generously offered when he tore up my initial divorce papers. I didn't look at Henry as the judge continued reading the settlement details. I didn't need to see his face to know what was there. The same mixture of disbelief and indignation he'd worn throughout this process, as if the very idea that I deserved half of what we'd built together was an insult to natural law. My lawyer, Patricia, a sharp-witted woman in her 50s who specialized in defending women like me, squeezed my hand under the table. "Congratulations," she whispered. "You did it." I had done it. I had stood my ground against a man who had spent decades convincing me that my contributions were worthless simply because they couldn't be measured in a paycheck. I had faced down my children who, even at their ages, Thomas now 34 and Rebecca 31, had reflexively sided with their father, as if the power of his wallet had somehow earned him the moral high ground. The court session ended, and I walked out into the bright Virginia sunlight feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no triumph in my heart, no desire to gloat or celebrate, just a profound sense of rightness, like a broken bone finally set properly. Henry's health had never fully recovered from the stroke he'd suffered when he discovered I had donated his precious book collection to the library. The man who had once proudly displayed those leather-bound volumes to impress colleagues had been reduced to visiting them as a guest, watching strangers handle what he considered his legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been the caretaker of his mother, bathing her, feeding her, changing her soiled sheets, preserving her dignity in the face of a debilitating illness. I had done it all without complaint, believing it was my duty as a wife. Now Henry needed care himself, and instead of turning to me, he had looked to Diane. Diane had tried. I'll give her that. For the first few months after his stroke, she had played the part of devoted companion admirably. But caring for someone who is ill isn't about weekend trips to beachfront resorts or candlelit dinners in expensive restaurants. It's about the mundane, often unpleasant daily tasks that love transforms into acts of devotion. It hadn't taken long for the shine to wear off. One morning, 6 months after the stroke, Henry had called Thomas in a panic. Diane had packed her things and left without a word, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter. This isn't what I signed up for. And Thomas and Rebecca had tried to step in, juggling their own busy lives with their father's increasing needs. But they quickly discovered what I had known for years: caregiving is a full-time job, one that leaves little room for careers, social lives, or personal ambitions. Within weeks, they were arguing about schedules, responsibilities, and the mounting costs of in-home care. The solution, when it finally came, had a certain poetic justice to it. The same children who had condemned me for abandoning their father in his time of need had ultimately placed him in Sunrise Assisted Living, a facility not unlike the one he had insisted we could never send his mother to. It would break her heart, he'd said back then. She needs to be with family. I never visited him there. That chapter of my life was closed. The book returned to the shelf. Instead, I focused on writing a new story for myself. With my portion of the settlement, I bought a small cottage in a coastal town 3 hours from our old home. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a kitchen that opened onto a small garden. But it was mine, every creaking floorboard and sun-dappled corner. I joined a community center where other women my age gathered for book discussions, craft classes, and occasional day trips to nearby attractions. Some were widows, others divorcees like me. A few were simply women who had chosen independence over traditional paths. None of them judged me for the choices I had made, either in staying so long or in finally leaving. For the first time in decades, I had friends who saw me as more than Henry's wife or Thomas and Rebecca's mother. To them, I was just Elizabeth, a woman with opinions, talents, and stories of her own. When I mentioned I had always wanted to learn how to weave, they encouraged me to take classes at the local arts center. When I revealed I could mend almost anything, from torn shirts to broken chair legs, they started bringing me their damaged treasures to repair. I set up a small sewing corner in my spare bedroom, investing in a quality machine and fabrics that brought me joy to touch. Word spread, and soon I had a modest business altering clothes and creating simple home goods. The money wasn't much, but it was mine, earned by my hands, spent at my discretion. The children called occasionally, Thomas more than Rebecca. Their conversations were stilted at first, filled with awkward pauses and careful avoidance of certain topics. But gradually, as months turned into a year, something shifted. They began to see me as a person separate from their father, with a life that continued beyond the borders of their childhood home. "You seem different, Mom," Thomas said during one call. "Happier." "I am," I replied simply. And it was true. At 65, I had finally discovered what had eluded me for most of my adult life, the profound peace that comes from living authentically, answering only to yourself. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I never imagined my golden years would be my most liberated. After the divorce was finalized, I moved to a small coastal town where the rhythm of the waves matched my newfound peace. My modest beachfront apartment costs less than our old mortgage, but the view is priceless. Each morning, I watch the sun paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink, a daily masterpiece I'd missed during decades of caring for Arthur's mother and managing our household. I've discovered a community of women here, some widowed, some divorced, others who simply chose independence. We gather for coffee at Seaside Cafe on Tuesday mornings, take pottery classes on Thursdays, and sometimes drive to neighboring towns to explore antique shops or local theaters. Last month, I enrolled in a community college course on creative writing, fulfilling a dream I'd postponed for 40 years. My children call occasionally, Michael more than Deborah. Our conversations were awkward at first, but they're gradually warming. Last week, Michael mentioned bringing his family to visit this summer. The kids would love the beach, he said. And I think they should get to know who you really are, Mom. And his words brought tears to my eyes. Someone finally wanted to know me, not just the role I had played. When Deborah called yesterday, she asked if I would consider reconciling with Arthur. He's mellowed since the stroke, she said, and Cheryl left him months ago. I smiled into the phone. Sweetheart, I'm not interested in going backward. I've just started learning who I am without your father, and I rather like her. And my journey taught me the most valuable lesson I could share with you today. It's never too late to reclaim your life. So many of us, especially women of my generation, were raised to believe our worth was measured by our sacrifice. We were taught that putting ourselves last was noble, that surrendering our dreams for others was the ultimate expression of love. We silently accepted the erasure of our identities, believing the roles of wife, mother, and caretaker were enough. I'm here to tell you that while those roles can be beautiful, they should never become your prison. Your value isn't determined by how much you give up, but by how authentically you live. The world doesn't benefit from your sacrifice if it crushes your spirit. If you're watching this and feel invisible in your own life, know that it's not selfish to reclaim your space. It's not wrong to insist on being seen. Whether you're 25 or 75, you deserve the chance to discover who you are when you're not defined by your relationship to others. The path won't be easy. People who benefited from your self-sacrifice will resist your transformation. They'll call you selfish, dramatic, or ungrateful. But hold fast to this truth. You cannot truly love others until you remember how to love yourself. Don't wait until you're my age to realize that the most important relationship you'll ever have is with the person staring back at you in the mirror. If my story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Are you struggling to reclaim your identity? Have you successfully broken free from expectations that were suffocating you? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that remind us we're never alone in our struggles, and it's never too late to begin again.